Hey, it's John, True Vintage Guitar. This is from 1967. It's a Kalamazoo, Michigan-made Epiphone E360T Riviera model. One of my favorites to ever come out of Kalamazoo, Michigan, or anything to have the Epiphone brand name on it. And this one is an exceptional example. You can see that special finish there. Some of you already know what the name of that finish is. It's not candy apple red, but it is very similar. This is an excellent guitar. So I love the 1960s Kalamazoo-made Epiphone branded guitars because they seem to kind of break the vintage guitar collectability rules because their quality is every bit as high as the Gibson counterparts, but they still kind of fly under the radar, and so the supply and demand, function is not quite so skewed like the Gibson guitars. So yeah, their quality is every bit as high, they're unique and super vibey, and there's a lot fewer of them out there than there are with the name Gibson on the headstock. So that's one reason I think these guitars are amazing, is because they kind of break those rules. But if you're following my Instagram, that's at True Vintage Guitar, would love to follow you back. So if you do give me a follow on Instagram, then leave your Instagram handle below and I'll follow you back. But if you're following on Instagram for all those guitar stories and stuff, then you heard me talk about this before, and if you're a vintage guitar nerd, then you already know this. But yeah, Epiphone was its own one family-owned American brand up until about 1957. They were Gibson's one of their fiercest competitors, especially in the archtop arena. So when the archtop guitars started getting wider in the 30s, it was kind of Gibson and Epiphone. They were kind of competing with each other to make a wider and bigger and more advanced guitar. But about the 1950s, there was some, management changes in the family, and just the brand did not prosper like Gibson did. So by 1957, it was up for sale. Gibson purchased it in October of 1957 for $20,000, and then they shipped a bunch of half-finished guitars to Kalamazoo, Michigan. So by about 1959, they were shipping out guitars that were kind of half-made in New York and half-made in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Then by about 1960, those parts were used up, and everything was manufactured all on the same line. It was Gibson and Epiphone. The quality was every bit the same as a Gibson-made guitar. So there was an Epiphone brand line and there was a Gibson line. Most of the time there were model counterparts, so there would be an Epiphone model name and a Gibson model name, and the structure would be the same, the aesthetic would be different. So you've heard of the Epiphone Frontier, came out in 1958 or 9. That actually predated its Gibson counterpart, which was the Dove in 1962. So they're both long-scale maple back inside dreadnought guitars. The Riviera model came out in 1961. It was only a couple years after its Gibson counterpart, which came out in 1958, and that was the ES335. So the Riviera and the 335 are identical except for three key places, and those are the pickups, the tailpiece, and the shape of the headstock. So you've probably noticed the pickups. Those are mini humbucking pickups, and likely this was kind of an aesthetic carryover from the New York-made electric Epiphones, which had kind of a similar size pickup, and the pole pieces were kind of close to the edge. but they were actually single coil pickups. They kind of looked like they could be mini humbucking pickups, the ones made in New York, but they were actually single coil. Seth Lover designed these mini humbucking pickups after the full-size humbucking pickup, so they kind of drop right in and follow the aesthetic of the New York-made Epiphone guitars. So the pickups are very high output pickups, but the coils seem to be kind of not quite so many windings, so they kind of accentuate the higher end frequencies compared to a full-size Gibson humbucker. Both are excellent sounding pickups. I really do love the mini humbucking pickup. So a lot of you guys know the Epiphone history, that the line was discontinued in 1969. Then they started purchasing guitars made overseas. But they had a leftover stock of mini humbucking pickups that were intended to go in Epiphone, Kalamazoo-made Epiphone guitars. Instead, they used those when the Les Paul Standard with P90s became the Les Paul Deluxe in 1970. So if you're interested in Les Paul Deluxes, you can hit the link up top. I've got a 7071 Sunburst Les Paul Deluxe with mini humbucking pickups. It has 66 pots. Likely the pickups installed on that guitar were originally intended for a Kalamazoo-made Epiphone like this one, but you can kind of compare the sound of those pickups at that video. One interesting thing about the Epiphone models that came out of Kalamazoo in the 60s is that they all seem to be installed with the pole pieces of the pickups facing the neck instead of opposite, like the Gibson branded guitars with full-size humbuckers. They would have the neck pickup pole pieces pointing towards the neck, and the bridge pickup pole pieces on the bridge side, but the Epiphone guitars seem to be oriented the same way. That's different than being out of phase. A lot of them were out of phase. This one is in phase, but this is how it came to me, and I could tell by the pattern on the bottom of the pickup ring that was how it was factory installed as well. So the next thing is the tailpiece here. So when the ES335 came out in 1958, it had a stop bar stud tailpiece installed right here, and that was the standard tailpiece until 1965 when they went to the trapeze tailpiece. But the Riviera came out in 61 with the Epiphone Frequencator tailpiece, which is essentially a trapeze tailpiece that's compensated. It's kind of a marketing gimmick, but it's very cool looking tailpiece. Then by about 66 or 67, you could get a vibrola tailpiece like this. This is called the Epiphone Trimotone tailpiece, and not sure if you can tell. See if you can zoom in there. So that tailpiece, the fulcrum is compensated. So it's an attempt to kind of stabilize tuning over the different string gauges. It's a very interesting tremolo, very beautiful looking tremolo. Especially love the rosewood piece insert down here at the bottom. So that's the Trimotone, that's the Trimotone vibrola tailpiece. So the other thing is the shape of the headstock. We've got the long, tall headstock. In 61, these had a shorter headstock, and then they moved to the larger headstock in 1963. That also coincided with the smaller nut width as compared to Gibson guitars, which didn't change the smaller nut width until 1965. Most of these Epiphone guitars were either 1 5/8 for the Texan or 1 9/16 for the Riviera and similar guitars since 1963. So yeah, that's the late 60s kind of skinny nut width. A lot of people find that difficult to play. I love these guitars, so it's like if I can get these cheaper because the nut width is a little skinnier, I'm happy with that. So let's talk about the finish again. So yeah, check out that beautiful red finish. This is called Sparkling Burgundy, and it came out in the early 1960s as a Gibson custom color. Then by about 66, it was kind of a catalog option or even a goof hider color. So if there was some kind of manufacturing error, they would cover it up and with this opaque kind of darker red metallic finish instead of the translucent cherry stain finish. So yeah, in 67, the Riviera could be had in the sunburst, kind of edge burst Epiphone style finish, or it was a catalog option to get Sparkling Burgundy, like this guitar, although it did seem to happen more rarely. There's not quite as few of these out there as there are sunburst examples. But I just love the way this looks, especially with a metallic color on the back of a Gibson neck. That's cool to me. Love the way these guitars look. This one's in fantastic condition, has some light checking kind of throughout. Has a scratch down here, down by the tailpiece, but other than that, is a super fine example, and I really love playing this guitar. I just feel like $1 million while I'm playing it too. All right, now for the book recommendation. This is like one of my favorite parts about making these videos are the book recommendations, because I feel like every time I read a book on a subject, I come away with this like crazy passion and drive to go experience whatever that thing is. So if that's, 60s Fender guitars, and I'm reading about that just like drives this like interest and passion in those guitars, especially with this book. This is the Epiphone book, the Epiphone guitar book, excuse me. It's by Walter Carter. He's got a great shop in Nashville, Tennessee, Carter Vintage. There it is. I think you'll love this book. This has a great history about the House of Stathopulo, which was the family that owned the Epiphone brand until 1957. There's information about the transition from when Gibson purchased it, and then a ton of information about after 1969, when the brand was kind of changed into a budget brand. They still did some really interesting things, and it was kind of the test bed for Gibson to try out different designs and that kind of stuff. So one of the things they talk about are the scroll guitars that came out of the Matsumoku factories in the 1970s. Those are super interesting. I have not played one before. They look like they might be heavy, but they also have like a really cool vibe. And yeah, that's kind of the thing about Epiphone guitars, is that there's this huge like narrative arc with the whole brand, with the family that built this brand. And then in the 50s with health trouble, they ended up having to sell. And then in the 60s, Gibson kind of carrying the torch to all these unique, design cues and guitars. And then even in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, kind of continuing its own vibe and kind of sparking passion for playing music for entire generations of young musicians. So, yeah, this is a really fun book, has a lot of great information. There's a link below to an Amazon listing. I did buy this book with my own money. I love the book. I think you will too. The Amazon listing is, same price you'll pay on Amazon, but they'll toss me a couple cents if you follow that link to buy it. So yeah, full disclosure there. But yeah, I think you will dig this. It's really awesome. So the stuff you heard on the intro was me playing through my pedal board. It's clean to record the loop, and then I've got the JHS Morning Glory to boost the gain a little bit for the kind of lead stuff. Playing it through my 1971 Fender Princeton Reverb with a replaced cabinet because FedEx broke it in shipping, and it happens. And yeah, this is just like a really fun guitar to play. I could sit here all day and record stuff with it. So anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. If you do like vintage guitars, hit subscribe and then hit the bell icon to get notified every time there's a new video. I've really had a blast making these, so thank you so much for watching. Really makes me excited to go out there and find more vintage guitars. So thank you so much for watching. Follow me on Instagram, leave me a comment below, and let me know your Instagram so I can follow you back. My name is John, truevintageguitar.com. Go check out the website if you want to see some more vintage guitars. Thank you.